Great. Thanks, Amy. So yeah, this is really exciting to be joined by Elvin Turner today. So this section really in our meetup kind of follows on from previous ones that we've had, and we're really keen to bring the opportunity for really interesting discussion to this community of innovators across Bristol. So previous sessions we've had with Clayton Planter from Street to Boardroom, who did one of our first sessions around the importance of education, diversity and access to citywide innovation programs and projects. Our last one we did was an all-woman panel sort of talking about leading inclusive innovation and what that means, and women in innovation. And we want to continue doing these sessions as well. So it's kind of, an ask out to this community as well. If you have other sessions you'd like to see us do, or then we'd be very happy for you to do so. Some of the ones we're thinking about at the moment are looking at digital platforms for idea management, for creative collaboration, and other ones around sort of particularly looking at this challenge of diversity and inclusion in innovation, because that's a key topic for the city. So thanks very much to Elvin for joining us. Just to say very quickly, so Elvin has written a fantastic book recently called Be Less Zombie, which a few of us are working our way through at the moment. So Elvin is not just an author, he's an innovation consultant, executive coach, he's been a TEDx speaker, and he's an associate professor at a few different business schools. So we're lucky to have his input and sort of expertise on hand for today's conversation. It'll be myself and Rob sort of hosting the discussion. We're really keen also to get everyone else involved and inputting into the conversation. So if you have questions or thoughts throughout, then please put that into the chat, and we'll pick that up sort of towards the end of the next sort of 20 or 30 minutes. So hello, Elvin. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, nice to be here.
And I'll hand over to Rob in the first instance as well, just to give a bit of context.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, good to meet you, Elvin. We've had a little bit of LinkedIn chat, haven't we, over the last couple of years, but we're meeting each other for the first time today.
Yeah.
So I just want to show something I really like from the front cover as well. These people looking more zombie, these people looking less zombie. We never know, Elvin, whether they're the same people, but I don't know if it's a mystery to be solved later. But look, it's really great to have you here. And James and I are enjoying working our way through your book. There's tons and tons of really useful practical tips in there. And we'll get into some of it, of course, as we chat. But for those who haven't read the book, Elvin, can you tell us a bit about why you wrote it and what the key points that you were really trying to get across?
Yeah, sure. So I just take a quick step back. So most of my work falls into three categories. First, it's working with senior execs who are trying to answer the question, how do we do innovation? Don't tell me why, don't tell me what, just tell me how to innovate, because it just slips through our fingers all the time. And it's helping them design a context in which innovation can show up a bit more inevitably, rather than it being the bun fight that it normally is in most contexts. So that's the first part. The second part is often working with teams and helping them create a team culture, coaching around new ideas and products. And then the third area is teaching in business schools, MBA and stuff like that. So with that context, the reason I wrote the book, I never intended to write a book, by the way, and it was mostly born out of frustration that I would go into an organization, do some work, and I'm a consultant, I'm not going to be there forever, and that's never the ambition anyway. It's to try and upskill, create some capability, some processes and things that you can walk away and they're still working. But that walk away bit was really difficult, because I never felt that there was a resource I could leave behind that was going to be helpful for what's going to happen next, or new joiners who are being asked to do the same thing and they never went through the sheep dip brainwashing that everyone else has been through on the program to kick things off. So and there are I'm a book geek. I read anything about innovation that I can, and there's some really great innovation books out there. I'm sure many of us would agree with that, but there was never really anything, from my perspective at least, that was pitched more at the non-innovation practitioner, but I'm asked to do it anyway, or the leader who doesn't feel comfortable admitting that they've never really learned how to lead innovation at scale, but I could really do with some help anyway. So I say in the introduction, this book is not for geeks. So actually, this is the first geek call. You're innovation geeks. You're my kind of people. I didn't write it primarily for people who kind of understand how innovation works and what it takes to make it happen. It was written for everybody else who has never done this before, really struggles in all the way through the process. So the book's really, in the book, I talk about 2 levels of innovation. One is turn it on. The next one is turn it up. Turn it on is just getting to base 1, the building blocks in place that are going to give you the best opportunity to start doing something sustainably, rather than it being this kind of campaign-led fight for survival all of the time. So that was it really. It was a desire to want to walk away feeling like there's something there, at least a handbook of some kind that people can refer to. It's not, it's no silver bullet, but at least it was some kind of helpful resource, hopefully.
It definitely is. And so you may already know this, Elvin, but we've shared your Innovation Essentials resource.
Oh, okay.
With this group, right? So we have a LinkedIn site and people have commented about it already. If you haven't seen it, folks, have a look at a recent posting where there's a link to some free materials Elvin's made available. James, back to you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so yeah, Elvin, it's fantastic, and it's such a digestible book. I've not been able to, I've been able to read it quicker, I think, than most of other sort of innovation books I've been looking at, just because you've written it in that way. And yeah, it's easy to make progress through it. A lot of common sense, a lot of practical advice in there as well. One of the things I was kind of keen to ask you a bit about was this kind of definition of what a zombie is in relation to organizations, and perhaps you could just talk a little bit about that. One of the things that chimes with me is I think I've worked for a number of zombie organizations, and one of the things that resonates, I think, with us as a group is that it's easy within these zombie organizations to feel that innovation can be really sometimes impossible, and that it's not a fun or enjoyable place to be when you find yourself in that situation. And so one of the things I'm really interested in with innovation is opening up that space for people to innovate and be creative and enjoy what they're doing and are passionate about what they're doing at work. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about what you see as being a zombie organization and how you kind of move away from that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you where it came from to begin with. So I was doing some work with Henley Business School, and they asked me to come in and run an executive education day on innovation. And they had this whole range of courses that you can do, and innovate, because it's innovation, they wanted it to be a bit edgy. So at the time, everyone was talking about unicorns. So I thought, well, it might be interesting to see what is it that unicorn companies, so a unicorn being an organization that's worth $1 billion or more in valuation, but actually still trying to figure out what it is, and is this even going to ever make money, and is in scale up mode. What is it that they're doing that's different, not only in what they take to market and how they're disrupting, but how they go to market? And are there any principles that larger, more established organizations could take from them and put into practice to help them stay more relevant? So we needed this kind of polar opposite to a unicorn. So anyway, zombies came up as an idea, and we thought, well, actually, yeah, zombies kind of lurching forward, trying to find their next meal, or flesh, the living dead, and lots of people that I work with would perhaps categorize their whole or part of their organization of living in a place that, the clock is ticking. Our days are numbered because of the way that we think and work. So that was at one level. I guess the other level, though, was working with people who just burnt out. They're great people trying to do a great job, really trying to do the right thing, trying to raise the questions that we know we need to answer, trying to put forward ideas that the future needs us to be working on today, and yet continually being shut down. And in the research for the book, I read this very sobering book called Dying for a Paycheck. I kind of recommend it. It's really depressing reading, but it's interesting. What the key headline that stood out for me was that in America now, 1 in 5 deaths are directly have a direct correlation with just going to work. And that's the amount of stress and secondary illness that comes up because of stress. And so at one level, you could say, are we creating a workforce of zombies just because of the way that we run our organizations? Well, that's another book maybe. But so that this idea of an organization that is doing its best to inadvertently kill itself, it's clinging to what kills it. It's trying to do all that it knows well within its comfort zone, the thing that made it great. It can see the future coming and that actually their relevance is running out, but they're just holding on to this thing for dear life and putting all of their innovation into firefighting and incrementalism, which you need, and it's a fact of life. But all of the research says that's not enough to get you into the future. There will at some point be a significant transition in your industry, which you have to be prepared for. Either you lead it or you're a fast follower. And if you're not creating an innovation portfolio inside your organization that is going to help you keep running fast today, but also prepare for the future, that's not great stewardship. So the idea of the zombie company was really, actually, you could look at a lot of companies and you might not come into this, and it's a bit of a woolly definition of what a zombie company is, but we all recognize the signs. And we all recognize that we could probably be doing this better if we were more intentional about it. So really, it was a deliberately provocative title to get people's attention, particularly in the business book world, because most business books have got fairly boring titles. So it was an attempt to stand out. But I did have a bit of a crisis of confidence halfway through, as I went to interview some CEOs for the book, and you arrive in their office, they can't remember who you are. Who are you again? Why are you here? And you remind them why you're there, and you're going to talk about the book. So what's the book? Be Less Zombie. And it only took 2 or 3 funny looks back at me to make me think, oh my goodness, have I chosen the wrong title here? Because I want you're CEOs, I want you to read this. And if you look at it and think, that's not a serious book, you're calling me a zombie, I had to be really careful. But anyway, the publisher was very keen to go with it because apparently the Americans are going to love it. We'll see. But anyway, that's so it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of trying to get notice, but actually it was based on a serious point around how deliberate are we being about creating environments where the future can really show up. And that's really important.
Yeah. I love the metaphor, Elvin. There is something, isn't there, about kind of human nature and sleepwalking and slightly clinging to what we know, which there will be lots of nods around the group, I think. Lots of people here, I think we've got a real mixture in the network. Of course, we're interested in personal development. We want to take these lessons into our organization. We want to make things happen at city level. And whatever the unit is, and any of us can be lucky maybe in our organizations and do one-off innovation, but what do you think, kind of as briefly as you can, is needed to have reproducible, repeatable innovation, or at least up the odds of it?
I think the starting point, it sounds really obvious, but it doesn't happen. And it's making the choice that you actually want to do that in the first place. And I see in so many organizations, innovation it's not accidental, but it's very casual. And if we think about what innovation is, it's an argument with today. It's an argument with the status quo. It's proposing that something could be better and therefore different. And that means we're going to have behavior change, both inside the organization and with customers. And we resist change at all costs. So we need to recognize, to begin with, I think, that what we're really talking about here is change provocation, change management. And most organizations don't do that very well. So I think the starting point, at least when I was doing the research for the book, the characteristic that I recognized most frequently amongst companies you'd say do this well is they simply choose to be deliberate and strategic about innovation, and it gets factored into real strategy and real metrics and real capability building and real consideration around the culture that we're going to need, rather than a one-size-fits-all culture where path of least resistance is going to be incremental innovation. There is a reality around, well, if we want bigger ideas to show up, we have to be deliberate about the kind of resourcing processes, culture that's going to be required for people to feel comfortable to take risks. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be company-wide, but certainly in the areas where you are banking on bigger ideas, bolder ideas, and therefore more likely to fail ideas in many contexts, to have the best opportunity for that to show up. So the starting point for me is, one, choose. Are we going to make this a non-negotiable in this organization, that we, our strategy is saying that, let's say for argument's sake, we need to grow 20% in the next 5 years. If we keep doing what we're doing, we'll probably hit 10%. The 10% that's missing is the growth gap. And if we keep just doing more of the same, we're never going to get there. So that requires from us a different level of disruptive idea that could return, provide bigger returns. And that starting point frames the need for innovation. And then the second level is, okay, what would need to be true in order for those ideas to be able to show up around behaviors, around process? And so at one level, it's not rocket science at all. But I think one of the things that holds it back is that often executives and senior managers have never been shown a system of how innovation can work at scale, and what needs to be true, and what metrics can hold it in place. So I think the starting point is choose. The second point is really be strategic. And the third point really is put in metrics that hold it in place, because it's so easy. I see this happen all the time. Something unexpected happens in the industry and it causes us to wobble. And suddenly we retrench back to, well, okay, let's stick with what we know, faster, leaner, more efficient. And innovation focuses purely on survival. And the stuff that we know we need for tomorrow gets put on hold. It goes on ice for 6 months and ultimately gets forgotten. So the organizations that do it well are very good at protecting what they know the future needs.
It's fascinating, isn't it, Elvin? It's not rocket science. It's learnable, but it's definitely not common practice. I think lots of that resonates with people around the room here. James.
I think there's a bit in the chat, people asking kind of, how do we define innovation? And I think maybe there could be an argument that the brand of innovation, or the name of innovation, is kind of tarnished a little bit in some workplaces, because it's sort of separate to business as usual, and it's something we haven't got time for, and it's just a load of ideas which never make any positive change, and it's not related to our kind of core business strategy. But Elvin, I really like how you start the book off with saying innovation needs to be at the center of any sensible commercial strategy which an organization or business has. And that really resonates with me. Elvin, do you think innovation needs to kind of go through a bit of a rebrand, or there's one of the challenges is kind of, as someone working in innovation or someone who wants to bring innovation into an organization, one of the challenges they have is to set it out in the right way and to make it feel applicable to that environment. Do you see that?
I see it a lot, and I think it's one of the things when we work with innovation that we downplay to our detriment. I could see Manoj is on the call, and I was speaking at one of his network meetings last night, and I told the story. This has happened several times. I'll arrive at an organization and I'm briefed to go and meet the board and basically scare them into doing some innovation is really what they want me to do. It doesn't usually work out like that, but anyway, what's happened before is I get literally to the boardroom meeting, and the door is just about to be opened, and they say, "Oh, and don't use the word innovation," and they push me in and shut the door. Like, what? And I know what they mean. What's happened is they've had their fingers burnt in the near past with an innovation program of some sort. It's backfired and nobody wants to talk about it, but we still know that we need to do something. And I think language is really, really important. And so I'm very sensitive right from the start to understand where are you linguistically around this? What are words to avoid? What are words to play up, just so that the conversation can happen? Because I do see it. I see eyes roll, I see flinches, I see body language when I say certain words. And I know that that's important to pay attention to that if I want to get in there and help them. So I'd say that would be a starting point. I think innovation is helpful in some contexts and less helpful in others. And I think the point about definition is everything. I actually don't care too much about how people define innovation. There are so many definitions out there, and they're all perfectly fine, but just pick one. just agree on one so that we all know what we think this thing is and it isn't, where it begins and where it ends, and what its real remit is. My personal definition is the continual pursuit of profitable relevance, which is broad enough in its scope, but gives it focus to say, have to be relevant today and tomorrow. Otherwise, what's the point? We have to be profitable today and tomorrow. Otherwise, it's never going to work. So as long as we're aiming along a trajectory that delivers that, I think it's all good. But one of the reasons I know that I sometimes get invited into work is not just because I can do the process stuff, but because I've got a background in culture change and leadership development and communication as well. And it's that overlap that is, I think, really helpful in helping an organization do more than just train people in innovation and then now hope it's going to show up. You know, you've got to take people on a wider journey than that if it's really going to get traction. So I'm not sure if this is particularly answering the question now, but the word innovation, I don't care. Again, definitions, don't really mind. What you want to call it, I don't really mind. If you want to call it creativity, even though it's really not just creativity, don't get me started. And, you know, there's all sorts of geek side roads that you could go down. I just want to help people do a great job and survive in the future and enjoy the work, you know, the process of getting there. So if you want to call it something different, to me, I don't care. Let's just agree on the outcome and navigate a journey that's realistic about how we get there.
We hear your frustration, Elvin, with definitions. I know. I really like your story in the book about how you helped Pernod Ricard develop a culture of experimentation. Can you just tell us, you know, just a kind of minute or two, just a bit about how you did it?
Yeah. So Pernod Ricard is well, if you ask them, they'll tell you that they're the biggest alcoholic drinks brand in the world in the spirits and wines realm. They're actually kind of 50-50 with Diageo, but they're a big drinks company. And their UK organization was looking at the 5 years ahead. What growth do we need? And therefore, what culture of entrepreneurship do we need? And they kind of asked me to come in and do a survey, some analysis, and make some recommendations. So that was the context of why I went in there. So we ran a big, I wouldn't say it was a transformation program. It was an innovation initiative to start putting in some base blocks to help the whole thing move. The thing that changed everything for them, and the CEO has said this publicly several times, was the idea of experimentation, which was, so I was running the training for the board, and the marketing director at the time was asleep at the back, or so it seemed. And I was quite cross about it, actually, because everyone else seemed to be really getting a lot out of the session. And I was just starting to introduce the idea of minimum viable products. So the smallest possible experiment that you can run to test the biggest, least certain assumptions that you have about your ideas. And we were talking about Lean Startup and Eric Ries and Dropbox and all the usual sorts of case studies. Anyway, so we're talking about this, and this guy is sort of snoozing after lunch at the back. And all of a sudden he wakes up and says, so what you're saying is we shouldn't be saying, what can we build for 50K? We should be saying, what can we learn for 50 quid? And I still think that's the best framing of that whole approach. You know, dream big, start small, learn fast. So what we did there, and that was great because it really energized the board to get behind this. But what really happened was we taught every employee how to take an idea, break it apart, identify what are the leap of faith assumptions, the ones that matter most, how to run a tiny experiment, gather data, take it to your manager with a recommendation on, do we continue, do we pivot, or do we kill it? And keep it really simple. And hardly any budget available, deliberately to try and build that muscle for thinking really small, but having a little treasure chest available so that if people did need a little squirt of capital, there was something there. But what happened was a very rapid change in people's desire to want to step towards ideas that were previously seen as too scary and too risky to take the first step. They would at least go and prove that we're wrong, just like Google tries to do, or prove that there's something in this, even if we're not sure that this idea is quite right. So long story short, after about 6 months, the CEO started saying to people, don't bring me ideas, bring me experiments. have your idea, run 2 or 3 spins of an experiment and bring me what you're seeing. That gives me much greater confidence that the decisions that I'm making are founded on something more likely to be successful rather than Bob's latest brainwave or whatever's flavor of the month with the person who always has to have their idea put forward and the politics drives the agenda. So that data-driven level of experimentation really changed the culture inside the organization. I'll just tell one more quick story. It really helped that the CEO was really behind it. So we did the training, everybody got it, everyone got on with it. But what really helped tip the bar was on one particular occasion, the CEO, we staged this, and this is an important thing as well. I think you have to be deliberate about symbols that show up so that people believe this stuff is real. So we had this calendar for the CEO. At certain times of the month, you're going to show up and you're going to do something or say something, not made up. He genuinely wanted to do this, but you know what people's calendars are like. If we don't put it in the diary, it won't happen. So he would go, and well, on this occasion, he went to someone's desk, rang a bell, climbed up on their desk, and started telling everybody about how the person on whose desk he was standing had just failed. And this person's thinking, what are you doing? This is like the worst moment of his career. But what he did was turned it into this speech about courage and ingenuity. And at the time of making that decision, we believed it was the right thing. Turns out we were wrong, but look what we've learned. Congratulations. And gave him a bottle of champagne. Everybody cheers. Well, everyone's kind of going, really? Is this really happening? You know, and after doing that 2 or 3 times, people start to think, he means this. This isn't going to go away. This is going to be okay. If I fail, I might even get a bottle of champagne out of it. But it was, you know, so that's why I think it's important. Training the tools, learn the techniques, but there has to be this cultural journey that goes alongside it, which has to be led by leaders if it's going to work.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Elvin. Look, and James and I can probably, we've got tons more questions, but we probably think we should hand over, James, and get some questions from the group now. Yeah. So, Aaron, is this over to you to facilitate this bit?
Yes, definitely. Fantastic. Some of the things that have been coming through, there's been some questions coming through already in the chat, which is fantastic. Keep them coming. I'll do my best to put them to Elvin in the time we've got available. But I'm going to cherry pick a few to start off with. So Greg Smart asks, how do the challenges of delivering innovation, differ between small and larger organizations? Are smaller organizations inherently better at innovating, do you think?
That's a difficult one because it depends on so many different things, because you could be small and crap. You know, you just have bad processes, and just because you're small, in theory, you should be faster, but not necessarily. I think there's been a lot of research done now around optimum sizes of teams, and when you get above a certain size of team, it slows down, and similarly between, you know, collaboration between departments and things like that. So I think I would say in general, smaller companies are quicker, and you know, we see that in the market all of the time, but it does depend on, you know, who's in the team and how competent are they and what's the level of trust in that team and all sorts of other dynamics. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, it would be fair to say that smaller generally means nimbler, simply because the levels of decision making are generally much flatter. And in, you know, many organizations, you know, I did some work for a company once, and the guy said to me, senior manager, people only suggest ideas here that they know will make it through the system. Because if you suggest anything too difficult, anything that's too different from today, it's got to go up multiple layers. Every time it goes up, it gets watered down a little bit to make it more acceptable, or the ambition is shrunk a little bit until it gets to something that can be accepted. And then it comes back down, and then you can do it. And you think, well, this isn't anything like what we need to do, but okay, well, I guess it will do. And we get on with it. I guess in a smaller organization, there's the opportunity to quickly turn things on and potentially do things with less watering down. I mean, I've seen both. So I'd say, yeah, I would say smaller can be more beautiful.
Is it a case that larger companies can potentially fake it and have that sort of mindset and get teams working as if they were startups? Or do you think it's part of the culture that they can't necessarily get over?
I think that can happen. And if you look at, so I'm intrigued by organizations like ING, the bank. that has, so they're a financial institution, but they have mostly copied the way of working of Spotify, which is one of these born digital companies that works in squads. And I guess many people here will be familiar with that. Very different way of organizing and delivering value. And there is an organization, okay, they're not maybe a classic bank because they perhaps haven't been around quite so long, but they have been able to take that approach and still get to market and deliver tons more value per employee than the competition. And you would probably be okay saying that a lot of that is down to the choice of ways of working that they've adopted, which would be more akin to working inside a smaller organization, I think.
Got you. Alan Freeman asked at the beginning about definition of innovation, but you since covered your sort of stance on definition, that there isn't one definition. It's agreeing whatever it is at the beginning of that. But then you just dropped in a question asking whether you see a difference in the skills and approaches organizations need for idea generation versus turning those ideas into execution.
Yeah, there's very few companies that I go to that say, we haven't got any ideas. You know, there's tons of ideas. Usually there's a frustration that there aren't enough big ideas out there. And we kind of talked about that a bit earlier. And that's often to do with the system that we created, that only small ideas or incremental ideas can show up. I think, I mean, in the book, I deliberately chose not to talk about brainstorming techniques in the book because there's loads of great stuff out there that's already been written around that. But what I did want to talk about more was, in the space of creativity, being real. So there's a section called Be More Human, which is just getting real about the way that human beings come up with ideas. And so many of us are overcommitted, we're worn out, you know, we're stressed, and we are expected just to show up and turn on innovation automatically, idea generation automatically, and come up with instant genius. And we're just not being realistic about that when we know that stress and anxiety and fatigue has a proven cause and effect on how creative we can be. So in the book, I'm kind of encouraging people to get real about that and say, okay, where you have control, think about where and when these sessions are going to happen, time of month, time of quarter, location. And it's small tweaks, but they can have a big difference. And there's a ton of science to back that. So I'd say from the creativity point of view, get more realistic about not just the energy, but also the timing. So we know that great ideas emerge over time. And there's, you know, Stephen Johnson's great work around the slow hunch, and Einstein's great ideas happened over a period of 20 years. Now, I'm not proposing that all of our innovation slows down to that extent, but we know that ideas improve with incubation, which means you stop and you do something else and you come back to it, and while your brain works on it. If we know that, why do we insist on having a 1 hour brainstorm and then we're off and we're getting on with it? So in the book, one of the ideas I propose is this 5-day brainstorm. We have one on Friday, then you on Monday, then you let that whole thing cook in your brain. You will see things, read things, pay attention to things that you weren't paying attention to before that can inform your innovation, your idea. On Friday, I would guarantee most of the time you've got a better idea having done nothing. And you come back together and you share what you've learned. It doesn't cost you anything, but it increases it's one thing that can increase your creativity because you're being deliberate about it. So I'd say that's the first thing. I think the second thing around delivery, it's usually all about delivery. I've got this graph that I put up and I ask people to self-diagnose idea creation, idea delivery. Where are you? Which box? And everybody puts themselves high number of ideas, low ability to execute. And there's all sorts of reasons around that. Again, we're not deliberate about giving people enough time to do this stuff. We don't have a process in place. I have a great idea. I don't know what to do with it. Where do I take it? There's no team, there's no budget. Oh, well, next company, maybe I'll try it out there. So there's lots of reasons, again, why, because we're not deliberate about the environment and the context required for an insight to turn into a question, to turn into an idea, to turn into an experiment, to then potentially scale. And we know where and when the touch points and handover points are. We wonder why ideas don't materialize. Again, it's a lot of it for me is being deliberate.
Brilliant. Hannah's asked a number of questions, but I'm just going to pick out one for now. Can you give a practical example of how the turn up and turn on approach has worked and led to lasting change in organizations?
No, sorry.
That's great. Put you on the spot a bit there.
Well, so the reason for using that language, so turn on is it's born out of this frustration from executives. Why does it just keep slipping through our fingers? And here are some basic blocks to put in place so that you've got a higher chance of it showing up. And they're based on principles that anyone can apply, and also based on many other people's work as well, to show that this stuff does work. The challenge with, and it always works forever, is that it's often entirely dependent on who's in the hot seat. And I've worked in organizations where they have really they've done this kind of turn it on approach. They've really lifted the tide in the level of innovation that they can do. And then the CEO leaves, the next person comes in and they say, hey, you've done a good job there. Looks like you've nailed innovation. Anyway, this is my priority. And then all of the great work gets undone. So that is an ongoing dilemma. So once you've done it, doesn't mean it's fixed, because tomorrow will look slightly different from today. And 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter, we know this. Our relevance is eroded because the things that our relevance is based on is continually changing. So to think that we've done it once by doing the turn it on and it's solved, turn it on means and keep recalibrating based around what's going on in the market. So I'd say it's a bit of a cop-out in some respects. It can work so long as there's motivation there at a senior level to keep it switched on. In terms of turn it up, what I'm talking about in the book is when you get to a certain level, which I believe anybody can, which is getting the basics right so that we have a better chance of something happening, at that point, it's not like you're on your own, but your culture is unique. The way that you go to market, the maturity of your portfolio, the way that stakeholders work across your ecosystem, you can't legislate for any particular silver bullet direction. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. And you look at companies like Amazon and Google and the ones who have the superhero status for innovation, they've gone on that journey and they've realized the more that we can create a bespoke innovation performance environment, that becomes a greater source of competitive advantage for us because it can't be copied. And actually, we're a unique organization. So if we want to go from 0 to 3 in our performance, apply the principles, you'll probably figure it out, and it will work in most contexts. Beyond, I don't know, the mid-range, you have to work out what works best. So here we have a brilliant idea management system that basically gives us the details of what's going on anywhere inside the organization where an idea is. What does that look like at a level of competitive advantage where we are better than anyone else in our industry? Well, you're going to have to go on your own innovation journey to figure that one out. So that's why, and the reason why I don't want people to go there too soon is it feels too hard. So turn it on, get some confidence, get some quick wins, understand that this can work, and then start to get more sophisticated. But understand that only you can really figure out what that's going to be. You can't read Be Less Zombie 2, here's how it really works. It's just crazy to think that that's real, and sometimes there's not an appetite to do that extra hard work because we're all too busy. That's a very long answer, sorry. I need to get better at brevity.
That's fantastic. It's really, really good. I believe we've only got time for one more question, but then I think we're going to be able to then carry on the discussion. And this is fantastic. It's really, really good. I'm going to finish on Ted's question. Ted Fowler says, I'm an NED of a company that has a separate innovation team. I see that quite separate from delivery teams. How do we avoid the pitfalls of this approach?
I'm going to sound like a broken record again, but it's being deliberate. And I think sometimes the downfall of that model is that we are not deliberate from the start on defining what needs to be true in order for the flow of knowledge and experiments and whatever we want to call it, the stuff that they make actually has some clear handovers, and they don't become the enemy, the idiots playing on that stuff that's never going to work. We're very clear from the start about who needs to lead that, so when iPod was created, the guy who ran that team was told that his job title isn't head of iPod, it's SHIT deflector, because he knows that the whole company is going to try and kill this thing, because we don't make iPods. What are we building iPods for? You've got to be aware of that from the start, and have a leader who is robust and emotionally intelligent enough to be, and commercially savvy enough to be able to have the right conversations with the right people, so that we have those points of handover and interaction in place. But also, I think it's about, there's a really great book by that guy whose name I can never remember how to pronounce, an Indian name, Govindajaran. Help me out, someone. Oh, no, you're all looking blank at me now. Anyway, he wrote a book basically talking about three stages, beyond the idea, I think it's called. And so you have the people outside working on that stuff. You have people at the coalface, and then in the middle, you have people who are really entrepreneurs. They take something and they turn it into money. They scale it. They do that market integration piece, and then it becomes business as usual. So as long as you're more deliberate, I think, about what that end-to-end journey needs to be, and again, treat it like an experiment. Ask, how could this fail? What would need to be true? Let's flush out the assumptions, the unspoken things that no one's talking about, and let's have solutions for those, so that the pathway from, post-it note to profit has been mapped out all the way through. I made that sound really simple, but it's not.
In theory, it's all straightforward, but that is fantastic. Thanks. Thanks to everyone who's submitted questions in the chat. I'd ask if everyone could just drop a line into the chat, just to share their thoughts, what they've learned, picked up from this session. I'm sure we could carry on for hours quizzing Elvin. And getting some more great stuff there. But thanks very much, everyone, and thanks, Elvin. Yeah. And I'm handing back to Amy now to finish up.
Sorry, I can.
Oh, Charlie.
Oh, sorry, Charlie. You go.
I can pick up. I'll pick up from there quickly, because there's just, while it's fresh in my head, a couple of things that, there's so much there that we could pick up on to discuss as a group. Happy for everyone to come off mute and sort of join in to the conversation. But I wondered whether something that stood out to me from there was whether we're actually at a point in time right now, hopefully coming out of the COVID situation to a certain extent, but whether COVID has kind of ushered in the next bit of the industrial revolution, in a way, which is, before that, we were kind of, like you say, sleepwalking through jobs. Organizations were sleepwalking towards kind of an inevitable moment when they're going to be disrupted. You just need to look at organizations like Thomas Cook, I suppose, for the most recent example of that. And post virtual working, post digital transformation, and prior to digital nativity, if that's the word, natives coming into the workforce, whether this generation of workers is almost the transition generation between the old ways of doing things, restructuring organizations from one fixed structure to another, to change-friendly organizations where change becomes more fluid and innovation is embedded deeper into organizations. And we're getting through a painful period now of change. And if that's the case, where do we start? Where does the need for innovation, learning start? Does it start with what you're doing within organizations, Elvin, for instance, where you're trying to effectively train an audience that has been taught to fear failure, to be failure friendly, and kickstart from there? Or can we get in earlier, and can we start talking to students and kids about creative problem solving and becoming more friendly with failure, so that when they come into those organizations and start almost from the bottom up, changing organizations to the kind of way they want to work and that way they want to run their careers, that some of the work, some of the momentum is built up at that point. So the first question, I suppose the question to open the session, and maybe it's one for Elvin to sort of feedback on, is, do you feel we're at a point in time where where we are in a transformative period, and that it will become easier to broach the innovation subject internally because people will become more ready to fail?
I don't really know. I don't know if anybody knows, but My concern is that I think we have quite short memories. And I think if things start to veer back to more like normal ways of working, or at least people are back in the office, my fear is that the urgency that I see around innovation at the moment will start to fade again, and we'll just go back to old ways. And even if it doesn't, I think the thing that has to change really to make all of the things that you've just talked about possible is to change what we measure. And at the moment, the metrics inside many organizations are designed to perpetuate a highly optimized, highly efficient status quo, which lowers the ceiling on innovation, in my opinion. And until we come up with and implement different kinds of measure that reward and demand, certainly that leaders and everybody and the system behind deliver a level of, well, a portfolio of innovation that isn't just about today, I don't really think much will change, because we are what we measure. You know, and one of the biggest frustrations I meet amongst senior leaders is, I'm telling everyone they've got freedom to innovate. Why aren't they doing anything? Well, because the system is programmed for them. It's not in their interests. The stakes are too high. Why would I do this? I'm busy enough. I don't want an evening job. You know, so we have to get real about creating the context. And usually that is all down to what are the big 2 or 3 things that we measure in this place, and what are the often unintended consequences in terms of behaviors that they provoke, and getting real about, well, what do we need to measure in order to do that? My favorite one is the way that 3M does it. You know, 30% of new revenues need to come from products that didn't exist 4 years ago. That demands more than incremental innovation. That demands leaders, if they want to get their bonus and all the other stuff, that they help create an environment behind them that allows this stuff to show up, the culture, the processes, and all the other stuff. So it's one example of a metric that can help. But I think unless we're serious about really what happens right at the top that affects everything else, it will have an inevitable impact on how much innovation really shows up.
Yeah. And I suppose for an organization like 3M that make products that have a relatively short-ish delivery schedule, that's a great one. There's no reason why other companies couldn't look at product innovation the same way, I suppose. One thought I had that, again, whether it's worth expanding on is that, yes, we need to measure innovation in a more fundamental way, but also we need to give people do a PR job on innovation inside businesses to a certain extent. Change, no one likes change, and therefore change makers aren't particularly well liked in organizations. They're a cost center, they're not a profit center. They are there's 2 ways of doing it. You either innovate out of fear, it feels, which is, you know, if we don't innovate, we're going to die. Or there's the positive innovation, which is just think of what we can achieve if we just open our minds and don't be afraid to fail. But whatever the outcome of that is, you're asking someone to do stuff outside of their own job, and you're saying, you know, in your spare time, you know, when you're not working, why don't you come up with some great ideas for us? Oh, and by the way, once you come up with those great ideas, we're going to ask you to help implement them as well, which means it's even more work for you. And you kind of go, well, actually, it's probably better to stay quiet. But I suppose the question then is has anyone in the group here seen good ways of getting people around measuring innovation in a way that actually encourages people to want to change and want to innovate? Or is it a company's people just stuck in their jobs and think, I'm just gonna keep my head down and crack on?
So I don't mind sharing something that I've done, and it's been quite successful with organizations I've worked with. Something called 5X, and it's $5,000 or 5 days. I open up to any development team that I can come up with an idea and pitch it to a board of sharks who sit and say yes. And it literally is that. It's, can you spend $5,000 or take 5 days to go do something? Come back and show us and showcase what it is and how it works, why it's better, who's it for, etc., etc. And that gets people excited about the idea and the notion of doing something which is kind of outside the day job. It's not a huge investment, but it gets people excited about the idea of doing something different and thinking about something different. So we really push the idea of doing something for the customer as opposed to an internal business process, which gets them focused on looking outside the organization and getting that kind of input. which is really useful. But it's been hugely successful in 3 organizations I've tried it in, even though there was a lot of skepticism around it at the start. It's been really useful.
That's a great idea. Love that. Love that. I heard a similar thing with, I think it was one of the banks that sort of gives everyone £1,000 on a credit card and says, right, that's yours to go and spend on innovative thinking. Come back and 10x that £1,000 basically, and not go and rent a Porsche for the weekend and go and stay in a hotel in Southend-on-Sea, which you might do. You might go, wow, I got a lot of thinking done on the road down to Brighton or wherever it might be. Obviously part of what we're doing, and I'm not going to bring it around to solvable, but the idea of what blocks innovation, certainly leadership involvement has become the perennial kind of main blocker. And Elvin, you talked there about how leaders, need to almost be timetabled to bang the innovation drum. And if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes, because it does magically unblock the whole process for a lot of people if they're behind it. I wondered if you had seen tools used effectively, and whether anybody else is using effective tools, because it's not about tools. Tools don't make innovation happen, but they are a useful part of the equation, I guess. And you have various platforms that enable that sort of stuff. But is there stuff that you see that sticks pretty well in organizations around innovation management or idea management, or online tools that people use to brainstorm that are really getting some traction and are really helping the process? And is anyone else using some good tools for that as well?
I'll just say very quickly, I think more and more people are switching to the online stuff. Still, a lot of people don't even know they exist, idea management systems. I think when people see them, they go, oh my goodness, this changes everything. Well, it depends how you use it, because you can actually just get no better results on the way that you run them and the way you do campaigns and everything else. So you have to be careful. I've seen people do really great work with just an Excel spreadsheet when you're just getting started. And that's, for me, it's, turn it on, turn it up. What's the simplest thing that you can use to begin with? And don't overcomplicate it, because often when we try and get too sophisticated too quickly and it doesn't quite work, it just creates more ill feeling. So I'm encouraging people to do things like use Google Sheets, Google Forms, all the free tools that are out there on as much stuff as possible. But Miro as a brainstorming tool, I'm starting to see those sorts of things show up more regularly without needing to recommend them. And I'm learning some new ones as well. So I think it's starting to happen.
I agree, Elvin. So I've got an example of a tool, but we are thinking for this network of hosting a future event that is about the use of online tools to support co-creation, etc. So we'll probably have a dedicated event. So I'm really getting to grips with Miro and Mural, and came to the conclusion that because a lot of organizations, they cannot really visualize, or they may not have had the experience of how these things worked. I thought we need to create a kind of showcase, a bit like a fashion house or a car company does. So I think those tools like Miro they've become more sophisticated, I think, everyone. It's essentially a very simple, but actually increasingly sophisticated whiteboard space. Just thinking about the leadership angle, we sometimes use an online survey that's a measure of how healthy the climate for innovation is in an organization or a team. These things have been around for a long time. They're accessible online. My view is it's never really the tool that does it. It's useful when it just gets the conversation started. What it definitely does is it tells that leader of the unit the effect of their approach on the climate, and it really makes them think. Something from us. What about from others? Any other experiences of tools or techniques or approaches?
We've done a certain amount of work with the idea of the Google Design Sprint. Where you have this very focused 5-day. Let's achieve some specific goals. And doing that virtually has been very challenging. So we've had to sort of think about how you create some of those same sort of moments for, I'm trying to think of the word now, where ideas spark off each other, where you get that kind of sort of creative soup, if you like, which we're kind of used to in physical meeting settings, but it's much harder actually, I think, to do it virtually. So that's been an interesting challenge for us.
That was, I mean, the interesting conversation about in this digital world, trying to sort of engineer chance meetings and collaborative moments is a key one, I think, for innovation. And I mean, I've been reading Creativity Inc. I've been dipping into it. I have children, so it's taken me about 7 years to get past the intro. But it's what I found at the time. I remember reading about how they basically rebuilt or built the Pixar office to encourage chance collaborations and people falling over each other and bumping into each other, literally, because they had converging escalators that met at the bottom, and all to create the workplace of the future where collaboration happened. And obviously, the punch in the face for that was COVID coming along and basically saying, "Ha, Pixar, you open your $10 million office and I'll raise you a global pandemic." But it does feel like, I mean, you hear people going, "Oh, we've done a through the keyhole session," or we've done a quiz session where we've all got to know each other. But aside from kind of leaving Zoom on all day and encouraging people to sort of dip in and leave their microphones open and it become a cacophony of noise, how do you create those moments of serendipity and those moments of where somebody goes, I've this is rubbish, let's do it differently, what do you think? Has anybody seen that kind of, has that been a challenge generally for people? Have you felt that innovation has slowed down over COVID because you're not talking? And maybe I don't think we realized how many ideas came out of just having lunch together. Anything from anyone there? I mean, that seems like a big challenge to the innovation team within an organization, that it's just a case of, the one thing that they had, which was let's collaborate, has kind of dissipated a bit.
I can share an example that I heard the other day on a call. Someone said, it was inside a bank, they have this, I don't know, it's an app or a website. You put your name into the hat and you get matched with someone and you have coffee on Skype or on Zoom, and it's on an ongoing basis. And it's an attempt to do what we've talked about earlier. I know I used to do a lot of work with O2, and they had some kind of blind date program, which isn't a virtual thing, but you'd get matched with someone, you have lunch with them. And I know that only Google can do this. I think they figured out that if people are in the lunch queue for something like 2 minutes and 46 seconds or something, that's the optimum time for someone to strike up a casual conversation with someone. It turned to work. What are you working on? And then they'll go and sit down. And then apparently Gmail was born that way. And so it's free again, isn't it? But it's just being deliberate about how can we do that?
It's I think it's really interesting how often the quality of relationships is massively important for innovation, but it's not much talked about. You talk about it, Elvin. I've got to give your chapter Hot Love a plug.
Are you reading the right book?
It's not what you think.
Actually, it wasn't what I thought. Yeah. But you do talk about the importance of relationships, right? And it's like, here we are, a bit of an anthropological case study. We're a very, very diverse network that's got going, overlapping with COVID. We don't get much chance to see each other, everyone. How do we connect, build up enough trust between us to take some risks across a city? That's really challenging. I'm not expecting an answer to that, but I don't know. Any thoughts, questions, wonderings from people?
Go on, Jane.
Well, I feel that with COVID, working with schools, innovation, they've got a growth mindset now, because they're absolutely stuck with people going in, they're stuck with work experience, how do they achieve that for year 10 and year 12? And also work experience. So in a way, you know, what Caroline Clark did with Zebra, that was meeting a sort of shortage for schools, but actually a win-win for her business that she's setting up. So I think it's definitely being creative, but taking that risk, because at the moment schools have got nothing to lose, whereas before they wouldn't have been involved with such projects. And perhaps using that uncertainty in a more positive way to move forward.
Yeah, it's like the great leveler, isn't it? This, you know, CEOs, you know, who are supposed to be the great experience, kind of the most experienced person in an organization traditionally, especially in organizations where they kind of reward longevity, I suppose, in organizations, have been leveled to the same level as the starter, you know, because no one has been in this situation before, whether they're up there or whether they're down here. And so it's become that moment where, if ever there was a moment to say, to sort of, as a CEO, to take real leadership and become almost like a servant leader and say, guys, we've not faced this before. This is a new situation for everybody. How do we navigate this, and who can we learn from? And actually, can we learn from the people that are just that are new to our organization? I love what Airbus do, where they run a session where their senior team is mentored by their graduates. So you get this kind of fantastic inverted business where graduates are saying, well, if I were you, I'd kind of think about this, or I'd do this, or in my experience, this works really well. And you got these like older guys going, yeah, do you know what? I hadn't really thought of it like that. And it just, the big danger of this whole period is that we just end up going back to kind of hierarchical kind of models of, you know, the cream rises to the top sort of thing. And we lose that kind of moment of, right, we're all in this together. How do we get out of it? You know, and also maybe a new definition of innovation around value rather than profit. So yeah, I think that's going to be a you know, I don't know about you guys, and I don't want to drag this down into sort of, you know, complaining territory, but this kind of desperate rush to get everyone back to work, desperate rush to get schools back again, desperate rush to get people so-called kind of productivity back again, which is as if there hasn't been any productivity in the last 6 months. Just feels like everyone is, and also frankly, the massive lack of kindness that we all showed each other at the beginning of lockdown seems to have totally dissipated back to, here we go again. We're not only are we back to how we were before, but it's worse because we've had 6 months of not doing anything to kind of catch up on as well. And that goes for sort of all parts of life. But I just feel like we haven't learned any lessons from the last 6 months, not just in our own personal lives, but also in business as well. And that the final point I was going to make was the idea of being less zombie, being not an organizational affliction. It's a societal affliction where students are walking into school like zombies. People are walking around Broadmead like zombies. People are, you know, people are just not. They've just gone back to that kind of level of, I'm going to look at my iPhone and trip over people in the street, and whether there's any learnings, Elvin, maybe from how organizations have become less zombie. So what does that mean for a community? How can we as a community and as a city become less zombie? And what does it take to activate citizens in a city or communities to really consider the future and their own part in it, and the fact that they can create their own future if they were to be less, if it were to pick up on a small number of things and do a small number of things differently? And what could that be? Maybe one actually to park and come back to, because I'm planning if you're interested, I'm planning a big chat on the 25th of September, where we're just going to get together for an hour and chat through a couple of topics. And maybe that's something we can pull into that session from here on. But I think it'd be nice to look at that one. You know, what can we learn about being less zombie when it comes to from organizational change into societal change? Big one. Big subject. Jane, I'm looking at you.
I'd love that. I'd like to, please, can I be involved? Because I think our school system creates zombies, our education system. And I know from some of the dialogues that we're having with schools, there's a need for role models, discussions, and they've got this catch-up curriculum, which is going to be so intense, but they're going to need inspiration, innovation. I'd really love an ideas platform, because as I've asked before, if you were 13 or 14 in Bristol and you had a great idea, where would you go?
Yeah.
Okay.
You look at the Lumiere, just really quickly look at the Lumiere model, which was developed by, an education model developed by a Brazilian billionaire who saw his businesses failing, and he worked out why they were failing, why they weren't doing well. It's because their people were afraid to get it wrong and afraid to experiment and afraid to fail. And so he said, okay, well, let's turn those businesses around. He found it really hard to turn them around, but he did. And he said, well, why was it so hard? It was hard because failure was ingrained in those people from an early age. So then he changed the education system in Brazil, and suddenly he's getting a workforce that don't mind failure and get it. And it's got to start at that level. If we want to, to have to not work so hard to encourage innovation at organizational level, we have to start earlier. That's my.
I heard this really great quote the other day, and the whole idea, the whole Ken Robinson thing about as we grow up, we have creativity beaten out of us. This guy said, "When I grow up, I want to be like a little kid." I thought that's genius. I really like that. When I grow up, I want to be like a little kid.
Brilliant. Oh, right. That's the subject of the 25th of September. When I grow up, I want to be a kid.
Fantastic.
Great stuff.
Elvin, you have a meeting, don't you, that you have to head off to in just a moment?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So look, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us and staying around for the discussion as well. We have really appreciated it. If people wanted to contact you, what's the easiest way to do that?
LinkedIn, if you want to connect on LinkedIn. I don't think there's many Elvin Turners out there, or elvin@elvinturner.com is my email address. Do you know, if I'm allowed, I'd love to be an honorary member, because I've really enjoyed this, and just hearing the sort of stuff you're talking about and you want to do, I want that for Guildford where I live. Yeah. So I'd love to watch and learn and steal and see what we could do on this side of the country.
It's not going to work in Guildford. Sorry, Elvin.
Join, Elvin. Join through the LinkedIn group, and we can send you a link to it if you want to make it easy.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'll do that.
Thanks very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Round of applause, people.
Oh, well, thank you.